Hey crew, it's Pitt, and I'm back with some more Gnosis. Today we are diving back into the works of G.R.S. Mead. This is Fragments of a Faith Forgotten. We are reading aloud and discussing as we go along the various points brought to light by the text. It is not the format for everyone, but people do find value in it, so you are more than welcome to tag along as we continue our exploration. Before we begin, however, if you are unfamiliar with me, any of my unconventional beliefs, or if at any point in time I lose you in the terminology, there will be several playlists linked in the corner above and the box down below, along with the original source material and the link for my book, so that you can get a better understanding of who I am and why I say the things that I do. With that being said, we are going to dive in and continue our exploration of Fragments of a Faith Forgotten with probably 3 chapters today. Beginning with Ptolemy. Of the life of Ptolemy, one of the oldest pupils of Valentinus, we know absolutely nothing. It was through some of the pupils of Ptolemy, mainly, that Irenaeus became acquainted with a rough outline of some of the ideas of the developed Gnosticism of this line of tradition. But whether or not Ptolemy himself was alive when the Presbyter of Lyons wrote the opening chapters of his refutation, somewhere about AD 185 to 195, it is impossible to say. Of the writings of Ptolemy, 2 fragments alone have been preserved. An interpretation of the magnificent proem of the beginnings, still extant in the prologue to the 4th canonical gospel, and a letter to a lady called Flora, quoted by Epiphanius. Whether or not the teaching of Ptolemy had any essential differences from that of his master Valentinus is at present impossible to decide, and the copied statement of Tertullian, with Ptolemy, the names and numbers of the eons were separated into personal substances external to deity, whereas with Valentinus these substances had been included in the sum of the Godhead as sensations, affectations, and emotions, is perfectly unintelligible to the student of Gnosticism. We will first consider the letter to Flora, and then the interpretation of the Logos Doctrine Proem. The letter to Flora gives the view which the Valentinian to Florida tradition held concerning the world process, the Old Covenant theology, and the documents of the Jewish law. Opinions, says Ptolemy, are divided, some holding the one extreme and contending that the Jews' law came direct from God the Father, the Logos. That is not true. We have talked about that several times before. If you are interested at all, the Bible study, I have the very first video, is why the Bible cannot be the authority. It is because the law could not have come from God himself, right? We have superseded the law of Moses. We have come up with a new commandment that God apparently did not even consider, right? Thou shalt not rape. That was definitely not included in the Old Testament context. We have decided that that is a better commandment, and so we live by that now. There are many instances by which it is proven that Jehovah, the God of the Israelites, is not someone to worship, is not someone to follow, and is definitely not someone to ask the help of. There will be blood required. And if that is confusing to you, I again refer you to the Bible study. Others maintain the absolute contrary and declaring that it emanated from the opposite power, the destroyer, the God of this world. This again is going to be a no, the accuser of diabolos. There is no counterpoint to the divine, right? There is no oppositional character with equal power in relation to the divine. There is no God sitting here and then Satan sitting here and the two contending between the two. God is all-powerful. He is in control. There is no one equal to God. We limit God by our beliefs, right? The things that we believe about God places limits upon God. God is infinite, beyond the scope and comprehension of the human. We limit God, and that limitation becomes the spirit. We've talked about that several times already, but there is no direct oppositional force, right? The power of creation is God, but the power of destruction is also God. The power of temptation is God. It is not some other character doing the thing. Now, there may be interventionaries, right? These entities which are designed to tempt you, That is a thing in my belief, right? I do believe that there are tempters, but they are not equal to God. There is no God of this world in that way. That is exactly the wrong way to be looking about it. That is a victim mentality mindset. I can't do that because I am ruled by Satan is stupid, right? Well, the devil made him do it. No, the devil didn't make him do it. The devil, in quotations, the entity, provided the temptation, and then you made the decision. The devil didn't make you do a damn thing. That is another one of those important things. Both of these extreme views are unwise. On the one hand, the law is evidently imperfect, as may be seen from the crude ideas ascribed to God in some of the documents, ideas foreign to the nature and judgments of the God of the Christ. And on the other, the world process that cannot be the work of an unjust power, for the Savior himself declared that a house divided against itself cannot stand. And the apostle long ago robbed of its sting the baseless wisdom of such liars in the words, "All things were made by him," the Logos, and not by a God of destruction. And again, Logos is not a person, never has been a person. You've never been able to put your hands upon it ever in the history of humanity. Ptolemy, like the rest of the Valentinians, condemns as strongly such false gnosis as later the now called Orthodox fathers, headed by Irenaeus, condemned all gnosis. But at this time, the phrase, knowledge falsely so called, was not a condemnation of all gnosis, for there still was an Orthodox Christian gnosis, as Clement of Alexandria and others have so well shown. Such views, then, are held only by those who are ignorant of the causative law, the one body of extremists being ignorant of the God of justice, the framer of the comic law, the other of the All-Father, whom the Savior was the first to know and proclaim to the Jews. The Gnostics held a middle position between these extremes, the only possible one. But Ptolemy thus proceeds to answer the doubts of Flora entirely in the spirit of what is now called the higher criticism. He lays down a position immediately self-evident to the cultured Gnostic genius and said to be based on the words of Jesus, but recovered by modern scholarship after many long centuries of obscurantism. The law, as set forth in the 5 books ascribed to Moses, is not from one source, that is to say, not from God alone, or even in part. In fact, 3 sources may be distinguished: laws given by Moses under inspiration, laws enacted by Moses himself, and laws added by the elders. That is true, right? That is absolutely true. Now, if you don't know how the law came to be, here's a quick one, right? Moses led the Egyptian or the Israelis out of Egypt. They wind up in Midian, and Jethro, Moses' father-in-law, says, you know what? You're taking on too much responsibility here. There are way too many people for you to be the sole judge of. And so what you need to do is come up with some laws and some judges so that they can enact that in your favor. It wasn't that Moses went to God and said, hey, I need some laws for these people. It was his father-in-law who told him, hey, you need some laws for these people. That is how that came to be. You can go back and read it for yourself, or you can listen to me read it to you. Go back to Exodus. Look at it for yourself, because God did not give the law. God gave them a covenant, and they signed it in blood, and they put it in a box, and then he gave them some commandments. But those commandments are incomplete, and there are definitely some additions that could have been made. The law is definitely not just. It is absolutely fucking horrible if you read through it. And so it is important to note that it was probably not even divinely inspired. This division is borne out by the words of the Savior, for with regard to divorce, he taught that it was permitted by Moses only because of the Jews' hardness of heart, whereas the law of God from the beginning laid down that husband and wife should not be sundered. Really? Where? The law of Moses was simply an enactment of expediency. It was not the law. Like, we read through the law. We did that here on this channel, and this is not part of the law. Moreover, the traditions of the elders were equally not the law. For the inspired law taught that honor was due to father and mother, and Yeshua had opposed this old truth of karmic duty to the ignorant tradition of the elders, which taught that anything given to father or mother by the child was a gift, a phrase which Ptolemy quotes differently from the readings of either the synoptic documents that still preserve it, namely, "Whatsoever benefit thou receivest from me is a gift to God." Thus, three distinct sources are to be distinguished, only one of which can be referred to what can in any sense be called revelation. Again, as to the first division, this in its turn is resolvable into three elements. 1. A good element, the Decalogue, endorsed and completed by the teachings of Christ. 2. That's not... Okay, so the Decalogue is going to be the Ten Commandments, right? Endorsed and completed by the teachings of Christ. Who is your mother and brother? Is it your family? Are you taught to honor your mother and family by Christ? Or does he tell you to abandon them? What is the actual teaching there? Is it the same teaching? Those are some questions you should definitely be asking yourself, because the answer to that is no. 2. A bad element, which he set aside, the eye for an eye, law of retaliation. And 3. The typical and symbolical rites, such as circumcision, the Sabbath, and fasting, which the Christ translated from their sensible and phenomenal forms into their spiritual and invisible meaning. This is borne out in a remarkable fashion by one of the newly discovered sayings. Jesus saith, "Except ye fast to the world, ye shall in no wise find the kingdom of God. And except ye sabbatize the Sabbath, ye shall not see the Father." See Sayings of Our Lord, Grenfell and Hunt, London, 1897. I'm going to assume something right here, and I may be wrong, and if I am, let me know in the comments, because I'm not sure about the exact date, but this was probably taken from the Nag Hammadi, right? Which was a collection of Gnostic sayings that was discovered, and it was a remarkable treasure trove until we got the Dead Sea Scrolls. But the Dead Sea Scrolls did not show up until the 60s, I believe. 1960s, not 18. And so they weren't coming from that. And as far as I am aware, the Nag Hammadi was the only other discovery since antiquity and current day, 1800s. And so I'm pretty sure that this particular excerpt came from the Nag Hammadi sayings and not from the canonicals. Back to the text. Thus, with regard to the third element, the Christ taught that the offerings to God were not to consist of incense and the slaughter of irrational animals, but of spiritual thanksgiving and goodwill and good works to our neighbors. That circumcision was not anything physical, but of the spiritual heart, that keeping the Sabbath was resting from evil works, and in like manner fasting was from baser things, not from physical food. From what source, then, came the inspiration of Moses in establishing the observances? From a source midway between the world of men and God overall, that is to say, from the intermediate realms, or the world soul, the fabricated power of this physical world. The source of Moses' inspiration was not the perfect deity of the Christ, but an inferior source, not good, for God alone is really good, nor evil, the power which opposes good alone being evil. No, but imperfect, the power of the adjuster or arbitrator. That I can agree with, right? What I said all the way through the Bible study was that Moses was collecting stories, amalgamating them, in order to raise his people from people that surround him, and was successful in large part. And so it wasn't entirely terrible, but it could not have been divinely inspired, because part of the law was that if you were cold and you picked up sticks on the wrong day and somebody sees you, they're supposed to beat you in the head with stones until you quit breathing. That is pretty horrible, right? That is completely arbitrary, completely outside of the box. Now, if you were picking up sticks to sell to somebody else, then I can understand the blasphemy part of it, kind of. Right? I don't believe that that is necessarily the intention of the Sabbath, but I can understand how they would think that. But picking up sticks for yourself to build a fire so that you can cook your food, well, it's better for you to not eat today than to be able to cook your food, or else we're going to have to kill you. That's pretty horrible. That's pretty fucking terrible right there. And I don't care, right, if that offends somebody. That is one of the least offensive parts of it, right? If you, not me, but if you were to go out and sexually assault a young woman, there's no criminal restitution for that. There's civil restitution. You have to pay her father some gold, and you have to marry her. That's part of the law too. That's pretty terrible. That's pretty terrible. I see this woman and I'm just completely consumed, and I thought, no, that's pretty terrible. That's who should be beat in the head with the stones, not the guy picking up sticks, right? So, objectively, looking at it from outside without the faith involved, the law is pretty terrible. And again, that's not even the worst of it. If that is confusing, I once again refer you to the Bible study. This source is inferior to the perfect deity. It is only conditionally righteous or just, and so inferior to the perfect righteousness and justice of God. The maker, or soul of our world, is generable, the creator of the divine creation, ingenerable. But the world maker is superior to the opposer, the world, whose substance is destruction and darkness, and whose matter is material and manifoldly divided. And again, this is exactly the same, right? The one who creates the world is the exact same as he who destroys it. There is no oppositional force. It contains both creation and destruction, positive and negative, masculine and feminine. That is just one of the laws of the universe. But the substance of the cosmic spaces of the ingenerable Father, the cosmic spaces or universals, as opposed to the world or our earth, the cosmic planes as distinguished from the terrestrial, is incorruptibility and self-existent light, simple and one. The substance of these cosmic spaces is differentiated in an incomprehensible manner into two powers or aspects: soul informing body, that is to say, the planetary soul informing the earth. This soul is an image of the ideal cosmos, and it is from one of its powers that Moses received his inspiration. So far, the sensible letter of Ptolemy to Flora, in which the Gnostic doctor, by his knowledge of the unseen world and understanding of the teachings of the Christ, intuitively applies a canon of criticism to the contents of the Pentateuch, which the best scholarship of our own century has taken 100 years to establish intellectually. I did it in about a year, right? And that was taking time off because I didn't really like where the Bible study was going. We will now proceed to consider the interpretation which Ptolemy gave to the glorious proem that now stands at the head of the fourth gospel. The beginning is the first principle brought into being by God, and in it the Father emanated all things in germ, or potentially. This beginning is called mind, Son, and alone begotten, that is to say, brought forth by the Father alone. The next phrase of being was the emanation of the Logos, reason, or word. In the first principle, the beginning or mind, the Logos, in his turn, contained in himself the whole substance of the eons, which substance the Logos informed. Okay, we're going to hit the Logos again. Before the beginning, there was God. And God was infinite, without limitation or any definition. And then God decided to create, and at the moment of creation, he became limited by the creation who placed upon him the limits. It changed from the infinite God, who is all things with no definition, into the Spirit, which is with definition, but still all things. It is fully God, even though it is not God in full. The Spirit is every single atom in existence all at the exact same time, but in stasis, right? The beginning is that change from infinite into finite, that snapshot of that exact moment when it changes from the infinite into the finite. There is no motion, however. All the elements are out there, but there is no combination. There is no collection. There is no energy. There is no life. There is no movement. There is no light. And then the Logos. The Logos is God speaking. God said, "I am the light," and became the light, and it was good. That's how Genesis actually reads. And so, at that moment, God placed into motion all of the things. Everything was in stasis, like a picture. And then it becomes like a movie. Everything is moving all at the exact same time. There are changes happening here and there are spaces in between where there's not any evident change. What we see, every single thing that we see, is actually an interaction of the electromagnetics stabilizing. Like your flesh is just a visible sensation or a visible emanation of the changes happening within you. When the oxygen, when you breathe, right, your spirit, the logos, takes that breath and dispenses it through your blood to the various points in your body. The energy emanated by that dispensation creates the visible sensation, right? That is how you were able to see. It is because of the power holding into change the actual reality. The various elements combined into you. That is the visible emanation of the spirit in logos. And so logos is quite literally every single thing changing. This lights all around me, that's the logos. My thoughts, that's the logos. Your thoughts, that's the logos. And so the logos cannot be personified. And in the exact same way that God cannot be personified. By placing God as a he upon God, you are limiting God to a he. God is not a he. God is beyond he and she. Contains both masculine and feminine. It is beyond our comprehension. And so when we see them talk about the logos personified, we know that it's not true. It's just simply a misunderstanding. Right? The logos is the beginning in motion. In the beginning, there was God, or there was the word, logos. Logos was with God and was God. Right? In the beginning, then logos. That's how it worked. Now, you may not agree with that. You don't have to. That is my speculations. That is my belief, and it has allowed me to take charge, in part, of the logos, to enact change willfully in my health within myself. You don't have to believe it. I have the proof. Back to the text. According to the lexicon of Alexandrian Hiskius, the philosophical meaning of the term logos is the cause of action. Let's sit on that. The opening words, therefore, treat of the divine hypostases. In the beginning was the Logos, and the Logos was one with God, and the Logos was God. Didn't I just tell you that? He was, in the beginning, one with God. I translate the phrase, Greek, to the words, one with God, and not by the simple and familiar, with God, on the authority of Ptolemy, seeing that the simple English preposition, with, does not convey the sense of the Greek. First of all, there is a distinction made between the three, God, beginning, and logos. I just did that for you. And they are at one, or identified. In order that the emanation of the two from the one may be shown, of the Son, or beginning, or mind, and of the logos from the Father, and then the identification, or at one, meant of the two with each other and with the Father may be indicated. I explain that a little bit clearer, I hope. For in the Father and from the Father is the beginning, and in the beginning and from the beginning is the Logos. That is what I just said. Well said is it then. In the beginning was the Logos, for he was in the Son or mind. And the Logos was one with God, for the beginning is one with God, and consequently the Logos is one. For what is of God is God. I mean, just not God in his entirety. It is our particular section of God. All that came into being through him, and without him nothing had being. That is, the Logos was the cause of the divine or eonic creation. And again, I just explained that. But that which has its being in him is life, the syzygy, or consort of the Logos. I will once again link the divine and the Divine and the Trinity Explained, which is chapter 1 from my book, will be the standalone video on this one, so that you can get a better understanding of that particular concept if you are interested. The eons came into being through him, but life was in him, and she who was in him is more akin to him than they who came into being through him. for she is united to him and bears fruit through him. And the life was the light of men. Men, signifying first of all the supernal man and his spouse, the church, for they were enlightened, or brought to light, through life. Thus far, concerning the pleroma, or divine world. The next verse, the light shineth in the darkness, and the darkness comprehended it not, refers to the sensible universe. For though the chaos of the sensible universe was made into cosmos by the passion of the divine Aeon, the sensible world knew him not, and this Aeon is thus truth and life, and word made flesh in the cosmic process. It is the enlightened only who have beheld his glory, the glory of the alone begotten Son, the divine Aeon or pleroma, given unto him by the Father, full of grace, another name for silence and peace and truth. And thus, said Ptolemy, distinct reference to the two tetractides, Father and silence, mind and truth, word and life, man and church, is contained in the proem. Such was the nature of the exegesis of Ptolemy with regard to the proem of the Logos doctrine, and here we must reluctantly leave him, for we have no further information. Arrhenius' summary, in his opening chapters, of what he had picked up concerning the tenets of them of Ptolemy, differs but slightly from the outlines of the Aeon process and Sophia mythos drama, already familiar to our readers from the account of Hippolytus. And that's going to bring us to Heracleon. This one's kind of short. Of the life of Heracleon, whom Clement of Alexandria calls the most esteemed of the school of Valentinius, we again know nothing except that he wrote certain memoirs containing a commentary on the fourth gospel. The date of this commentary, the first on any book of the New Testament collection, is generally ascribed to the decade 170 to 180 A.D. That's not far from when they were written. The Gnostic Heracleon is thus the first commentator of canonical Christianity, and considerable fragments of his work have been preserved by Origen in his own commentary on the so-called Johannine Gospel. These fragments were first collected by Grabe in his Specialigium, reprinted by Massoud and Stieren in their editions of Arrhenius, and by Hilgenfeld in his Ketsergeschichte. And finally, in 1891, re-edited from a new collection of all the 8 unknown, only 3 having previously been collated, manuscripts by Brooks in Text and Studies. In these fragments, Heracleon assumes the Valentinian system as a basis, but it is kept in the background, and his exegesis is often endorsed by Origen. The Gnostics were still in the Christian ranks, they were still members of the general Christian body and desired to remain members, but bigotry finally drove them out because they dared to say that the teaching of the Christ contained a wisdom which transcended the comprehension of the majority. The commentary of Heracleon, however, need not detain us, for it is, so to say, outside the circle of distinct Gnostic exegesis. It stands midway between it and general Christianity, and in almost the same position as the views of Clement and Origen. And that's going to bring us to Bardsanes. We will now treat of Bardsanes, the last of the Gnostics, as Hilgenfeld calls him, and so bring to an end these rough sketches of the Christian theosophists which we have endeavored to reconstruct from the disfigured scraps of the originals preserved in patristic literature. Bardsanes was the last of the Gnostics in the sense of being the last who attempted to make any propaganda of the phase of the gnosis we are dealing with among the ranks of the common Christianity. For the gnosis was still studied in secret for centuries and often reappeared in the pages of history in other guises, e.g. the so-called Manichaean movement, for you may pitch out nature with a fork, still she will find a way home. Bardsanes, or Bardsanes, is so called from the river Dysan, the leaper, on the banks of which he was born at Edessa on July 11, 155 A.D., and died, most probably, in the same city in 233, at the age of 78. His parents, Nuhama and Naharashima, were rich and noble, and young Bardsanes not only received the best education in manners and learning which was procurable, but was brought up with a prince who afterwards succeeded to the throne as one of the Abgars. He not only shared the young prince's martial exercises, but in his youth won great fame for his skill in archery. He married and had a son, Harmonius. At what age he embraced Gnostic Christianity is uncertain, but his eager spirit not only speedily converted his royal friend and patron, but introduced the Abgar to make it the state religion, and thus, it is said, Bardsanes must have the credit of indirectly establishing the first Christian state. When Heracleon dethroned the Abgar Bar-Manu in 216, Bardsanes made manful defense of the Christian faith before the representative of the Roman emperor, so that even Epiphanes is compelled to call him almost a confessor. Subsequently, he went for a time to Armenia, where he composed a history based on the Temple Chronicles, which he found in the fortress of Mead, and translated it into Syriac. This Armenian history of Bardsanes was the basis of the subsequent history of Moses of Corinne. Bardsanes was also a great student of Indian religion and wrote a book on the subject from which the Platonist Porphyry subsequently quoted. But it was as a poet and writer on Christian theology and theosophy that Bardsanes gained so wide a reputation. He wrote many books in Syriac and also Greek, of which he was said to be master, but even the titles of most of them are now lost. His most famous work was a collection of 150 hymns or psalms on the model of the psalm collection of the Second Temple as still preserved in the Old Covenant documents. He was the first to adapt the Syriac tongue to metrical forms and set the words to music. These hymns became immensely popular, not only in the Edessene kingdom, but wherever the Syriac tongue was spoken. Of the rest of his works, we hear of such titles as Dialogues Against the Marcionites, The Light and Darkness, The Spiritual Nature of Truth, The Stable and Unstable, and Concerning Fate. Nothing of these has come down to us except a Syriac treatise, which was brought to the British Museum in 1843 among the Nitrian manuscripts. This manuscript is entitled Book of the Law of the Countries and purports to be a summary of Bardsanes' views on fate or karman, as set forth by one of his pupils. The Syriac text and English translation were published by Curitin in 1855, and once more, as in the case of the discovery of the Philosophemena manuscript and Basilides, the possession of an approximately first-hand source has revolutionized the old view, based on the hearsay of the fathers generally, and of the polemic of Ephraim in particular. In fact, the latest view, that of Hort, tries to rob Gnosticism of Bardsanes and carry him off into the fold of orthodoxy. As more is known and understood about the Gnostics, the same policy will no doubt be adopted in other cases, but surely, since orthodoxy has cursed Bardsanes throughout the ages, it might at least leave him the name derived from those of whom his master Valentinus earned his wisdom, and let him be Gnostic still. But before considering Bardsanes' views on fate, let us see whether we can abstract anything of value from the indirect sources. We are indebted for what we know mainly to Ephraim of Edessa, who wrote some 120 years later than our Gnostic. Of the temper of this saint when combating a dead man who had done him no injury, and who had been so loved and admired by all who knew him, we may judge by the epithets he applied to Bardsanes, who, he avers, died with the Lord in his mouth and demons in his heart, because a house divided will absolutely stand. Thus, he apostrophizes Bardsanes as a garrulous sophist, of tortuous and double mind, outwardly orthodox, a heretic in secret, a greedy sheepdog in league with the wolves, a faithless servant, a cunning dissembler, practicing deceit with his songs. In his jealous fury, however, Ephraim confuses Bardsanes, Marcionites, and Manichaeans, although Bardsanes strongly opposed the views of the former, and the religion of the latter was as yet unborn when the Gnostic doctor wrote Ephraim's 56 hymns against heresies. For instance, the meter and music of which he appropriated from our Gnostic poet are an indiscriminate polemic against not only Marcion, Bardsanes, and Mead, but also against their disciples, the very different views of both teachers and pupils being hopelessly jumbled together. The only clear traces of Bardsanes are 4 scraps from his hymns, quoted in the last 2 hymns of Ephraim. The first 3 are as follows in Hort's B translation. 1. Thou fountain of joy, whose gate by commandment opens wide to the mother, which beings divine have measured and founded, which father and mother in their union have sown, with their steps have made fruitful. 2. Let her who comes after thee, to me, be a daughter, a sister to thee. 3. When at length shall it be ours, to look on thy banquet, see the young maiden, the daughter thou settest on thy knee and caressest. I don't know about caressing your daughter. The first fragment is generally referred to the idea of paradise, which is usually placed above the third of the 7 heavens or in the midst of the 7 spheres, about the heart. It seems, however, rather to refer to the Ogdoad, or space above the 7 phases of psychic substance, the Jerusalem above the Valentinians. The second fragment appears to be an address of the Divine Mother to the elder of her 2 daughters, the wisdom above in the Pleroma, and the wisdom below in the Ogdoad, where is the spiritual heaven world. The third fragment is most probably an address to the Divine Mother of all, the Holy Spirit, and refers to the consummation of the world process, when the spiritual souls shall be taken from the Ogdoad into the Pleroma, and made one with their divine spouses at the great wedding feast, in the space of the Light Maiden, the wisdom above. The remaining fragment consists of only 2 lines and is as follows. My God and my head, hast thou left me alone? This cry was ascribed to the lower wisdom by the Valentinian school, both in the world drama, when the world substance invokes the aid of her consort, the Aeonic world fashioner, and also in the soul tragedy of the spirit fallen into matter, the sorrowing Sophia, as in the Pistis Sophia treatise. Nothing more of a certain nature can be deduced from the polemical writings of Ephraim, and the only scrap of interest we can glean from other writers is a beautiful phrase preserved by the Syrian writer Philoxenus of Mabuk, about 500 A.D. The Ancient of Eternity is a boy, that is to say, is ever young. Let us now turn to Bardsanes' views on astrology and fate, or, in other words, his conception of Carmen, to quote a few passages from the Curitan's somewhat unintelligible translation of the Book of the Laws of Countries. This dialogue was written by a pupil of our Gnostic, and Bardsanes is introduced as the main speaker. In fact, the pupils only break in here and there with a short question for literary effect. We may be, therefore, fairly confident that we have in this treatise a faithful reproduction of the views, not only of Bardsanes on fate or Carmen, but also of the Gnostics of his school. The following extracts from the speeches of Bardsanes will throw much light also on the astrological ideas in the Pistis Sophia. I, likewise, know that there are men who are called Chaldeans, and others who love this knowledge of the art as I also once loved it, before he met with the teachings of Valentinus. For it has been said to me in another place that the soul of man is capable of knowing that which many do not know, and the same men, meditate to do, and all that they do wrong, and all that they do good, and all the things which happen to them in riches, and in poverty, and in sickness, and in health, and in the defects of the body, it is from the influence of those stars which are called the 7. They befall them, and they are governed by them. But there are others who say the opposite of these things. How that this art is a lie of the Chaldeans, or that fortune does not exist at all, but it is an empty name, and all things are placed in the hands of man, great and small, and bodily defects and faults happen and befall him by chance. But others will say that whatsoever a man doeth, he doeth by his own will, by the free will that has been given to him, and the faults and defects and evil things which happen to him, he receiveth as a punishment from God. But as for myself, in my humble opinion, it appeareth to me that these three sects are partly true and partly false. They are true because men speak after the fashion which they see, and because, also, men see how things happen to them and mistake. Because the wisdom of God is richer than they, which has established the worlds and created the man, and has ordained the governors, and has given to all things the power which is suitable for each one of them. But I say that God, and the angels, and the powers, and the governors, and the elements, and men and animals have this power. But all these orders of which I have spoken have not power given to them in everything. For he that is powerful in everything is one. But they have power in some things, and in some things they have no power, as I have said, that the goodness of God may be seen in that in which they have power, and in that which they have no power, they may know that they have a Lord. There is, therefore, fortune, as the Chaldeans say. And that everything is not in our own free will, that is, that free will is not absolute, is plainly visible in everyday experience. I call these the bottlenecks. I discuss them at length in my book, which you can pick up from the link down below, or you can join for a membership for like $4 a month, and I can read it aloud to you. But as far as the free will part goes, right, you are free to choose your reaction to the circumstances every single time. But sometimes there are circumstances that will happen regardless of your choice. For instance, my broken leg was not my fault, right? It was not even directly related to a choice that I made, but that someone else made. My reaction to that is my choice. And I can either give in to the lower side and get mad and angry and bitter, or I can give in to the upper side and hope that he gets the help that he needs and that the law takes care of it, and I just release it and I don't hold on to that bitterness. That bottleneck was unavoidable. My reaction to it is my free will. And so you do have free will in pretty much everything, even the things which you don't decide to happen. Now, I believe that those things, those bottlenecks, you decided prior to incarnation, right? The soul being eternal was somewhere prior to being here. I believe that when it was there with Source prior to incarnation, we decided, hey, I'm going to learn lessons, right? Everybody you ever meet will teach you a lesson. Sometimes it's a good lesson, sometimes it's a bad lesson, but it is a lesson regardless. And you agreed to those lessons. I agreed to have the lesson from my neighbor to break my leg. That doesn't mean that it was a good thing to happen, but it was a necessary thing for my spiritual growth so that I can reinforce my free will, right? My free will is to seek God and upward momentum of my spirit in every instance, even when it is something outside of my control. And so I agree with this. Not everything is in your free will. Some things are outside of it. Now, I believe that you freely chose those things prior to incarnation, so it gets a little iffy right there. But I do believe that. Back to the text. Fortune also plays its part, but is not absolute, and nature also. Thus, we men are found to be governed by nature equally, and by fortune differently, and by our free will, each as he wishes. That which is called fortune is an order of procession, which is given to the powers and the elements by God, and according to this procession and order, intelligences, minds, egos, are changed by their coming down to be with the soul, and souls are changed by their coming down to be with the body, and this alteration itself is called the fortune, and the nativity of this assemblage, which is being sifted and purified for the assistance of that which, by the favor of God and by grace, has been assisted, and is being assisted, till the consummation of all. Compare in the system of bacillities the benefiting and being benefited in turn. The body, therefore, is governed by nature, the soul also suffering with it and perceiving, and the body is not constrained nor assisted by fortune in all the things which it does individually. For a man does not become a father before 15 years, nor does a woman become a mother before 13 years. Wow. Times were different. And in the same manner, also, there is a law for old age, because women become effete from bearing and are deprived of the natural power of begetting. while other animals which are also governed by their own nature, before those ages which I have specified, not only procreate, but also become too old to procreate. In the same manner, as also the bodies of men, when they are grown old, do not procreate, nor is fortune able to give them children at that time at which the body has not the nature to give them. Neither, again, is fortune able to preserve the body of man in life, without eating and without drinking, nor even when it has meat and drink, to prevent it from dying. For these and many other things pertain to nature itself. But when the times and manners of nature are fulfilled, then comes fortune, apparent among these ineffective things that are distinct one from another, and at one time assists nature and increases, and at another hinders it and hurts. And from nature cometh the growth and perfection of the body. But apart from nature, and by fortune, comes sickness and defects in the body. For nature is the connection of males and females, and the pleasure of the both heads, sick. But from fortune comes abomination, and a different manner of connection, and all of the filthiness and indecency which men do for the cause of connection through their lust. For nature is birth and children, and from fortune sometimes the children are deformed, and sometimes they are cast away, again, different times, and sometimes they die untimely. From nature there is a sufficiency and moderation for all bodies, and from fortune comes the want of food, and affliction of the bodies, and thus, again, from the same fortune is gluttony, and extravagance which is not requisite. Nature ordains that old men should be judges for the young, and wise for the foolish, and that the valiant should be chiefs over the weak, and the brave over the timid. But fortune causeth that boys should be chiefs over the aged, and fools over the wise, and that in time of war the weak should govern the valiant, and the timid the brave. And know ye distinctly that, whenever nature is disturbed from its right course, its disturbance is from the cause of fortune, because those heads and governors, upon whom that alternation is which is called nativity, are in opposition one to the other, and those of them which are called right, they assist nature and add to its excellency whenever the procession helps them, and they stand in the high places which are in the sphere in their own portions, and those which are called left are evil, and whenever they too occupy the places of height, they are opposed to nature, and not only injure men, but at different times also animals and trees and fruits, and the produce of the year, and the fountains of water, and everything else that is in the nature which is under their control. And on account of these divisions and sects which exist among the powers, some men have supposed that the world is governed without any superintendence, because they do not know that these sects and divisions and justification and condemnation proceed from that influence which is given in free will by God. That those actions also by the power of themselves may either be justified or condemned. As we will see that fortune crashes nature, so we can also see that the free will of man, repelling and crushing fortune herself, but not in everything, as also fortune itself doth not repel nature in everything, for it is proper that the three things, nature and fortune and free will, should be maintained in their lives until the procession be accomplished and the measure and number be fulfilled, as it seemed good before him who ordained how should be the life and perfection of all the creatures, and the state of all beings and natures. Bardsanes thus makes free will, fate, and nature the three great factors of the karmic law, all three being ultimately in the hand of God. Each reacts on each. None is absolute. Nature has to do with body, fate, or fortune, with soul, and free will, with spirit. None of them is absolute, the absolute being in God alone. By a strange chance, however, one of the hymns of the great poet of Gnosticism has been preserved to us entire. It is now generally admitted that the beautiful Hymn of the Soul, as it has been called, embedded in the Syriac form of apocryphal Act of Judas Thomas, preserved in the British Museum Codex, is almost undoubtedly from the stylus of Bardsanes. Nodecki and Mackey were the first scholars to call attention to the fact. See Lipsius's Die Apocryphen Apostolischichten. It is a beautiful legend of initiation, and was first translated by Wright, Apocryphal Acts of the Apostles. It has now, quite recently, 1898, been retranslated by Bevan, using Wright's version as a basis. Since the time of Wright, so much work has been done on this masterpiece of religious poetry, as the Cambridge Reader in Arabic justly calls it, that the translation of the pupil is to be preferred to that of the teacher, and Professor Bevan's work must now be considered not only to have superseded Wright's, but to be the best on the subject. The high probability of the Bardsanes or origin of the poem is based on the following considerations. The three main accusations of the Orthodox Father Ephraim against Bardsanes, who, he says, taught that there were 7 essences, ithei, are 1. That he denied the resurrection and regarded the separation of the soul from the body as a blessing. 2. That he held a theory of divine mother, who, in conjunction with the Father of life, gave birth to a being called the Son of the living. 3. That he believed in a number of lesser gods, that is to say, eternal beings subordinated to the supreme God. Now it is remarkable, says Professor Bevan, that these 3 heresies all appear distinctly in the poem before us. There can be no doubt that the Egyptian garb, which the prince puts on as a disguise and casts away as soon as his mission is accomplished, represents the human body. The emphatic declaration that the filthy and unclean garb is left in their country conveys an unmistakable meaning. It would be difficult, in an allegorical piece, to deny a material resurrection more absolutely. Since Bardsanes, like all great Gnostics, believed in reincarnation, such a conception as the resurrection of the same physical body must have been regarded by him as a gross superstition of the ignorant. Such a proof of identity of doctrine, as is here brought forward, could hardly occur to one who has realized the meaning of the doctrine of rebirth. The true clothing of the soul, according to the poet, is the ideal form which it feet behind in heaven and will resume after death. Only after the death unto sin, the light robe is not for all. As for the Father of life, the Mother and the Son of the living, they here figure as the Father of the King of kings, and the Mother of the Queen of the East, and Brother, the next in rank. Finally, the lesser gods appear as the kings, who obey the command of the King of kings. If the student, in reading this masterpiece of Gnostic poesy, will bear in mind the beautiful parable of the prodigal son as preserved in the third synoptic, he will be able to trace the basic similarity of ideas in the outer and inner traditions, and note how the inner expands and explains the outer. There is definitely more to reading in the prodigal son than what most people believe, and again I refer you to the Bible study. I do not know on what authority this beautiful poem has been called the hymn of the soul. There is no authority in the text for the title, and the Gnostic poet had a far more definite theme in mind. He sang of the consummation of the Gnostic life, the crown of victory at the end of the path, not of any vague generalities, but of a very definite goal towards which he was running. He sang of the wedding garment, the robes of initiation, so beautifully described in the opening pages of the Pistis Sophia. Thus, then, in most recent translation runs what I will venture to call the hymn of the robe of glory, which we will be dealing with tomorrow. That is going to bring us to the end of this particular study. Hopefully I brought a little bit of enlightenment and not too much confusion to a series of somewhat difficult topics. I understand. I have some unconventional beliefs and a tendency to step on toes when I relay those. It is not intentional, but I do not apologize for it. I am here to dispense the things that I know. I am here to question the things that I don't know, right? Even I do question the things that I know, but for the most part, they're pretty solid these days. I am fairly convinced about the things that I talk about. Now, most of them still remain in the realm of speculation because they are personal. I have had revelatory experiences. I cannot give that to you. I can relay it to you. You can accept it or deny it as you want. My understanding of the Trinity, of the infinite, of the Spirit, of the Logos, those are things that I believe have been revealed to me, and I have outlined them as best as I can. I may be incorrect, but it appears to be pretty much in conjunction with everybody's belief in the bottom, right? At the base level. People add in personages, right? The Logos is Jesus. No. The Logos is change. It is literally the universe in motion, and so it cannot be a singular person. That steps on toes. It is not intentional, but it is not something that I am going to apologize for because those toes need to be stepped on. If you are believing that the Logos was an incarnation, you are wrong. Now, that isn't my estimation. That is my speculation, but I stand on that pretty firmly. It is the same as saying that the all-encompassing everything was just here, and that doesn't work. That's like saying that you can show up inside of your fingernail. It's just not going to happen. The fingernail is part of you, but it is not you. Your soul, the individualized piece of divine that makes the decisions for your body, that is a piece of the divine, but it is not the divine in itself, and so you are not a god. It is not ever going to be able to incarnate within itself. It's one of the few limitations that God is going to hold, because God is external from the created reality. It becomes spirit inside of the created reality. And so, while the spirit is indeed entirely God, it is not God in its entirety. There is still parts of outside of the creation, whereas the spirit is entirely within the creation. And hopefully that's not too confusing. If you like what I'm doing over here, let me know down below. Give me a like, a share, a follow, throw me a comment. If you agree or disagree with anything that was said, put it in the box down below. And if it remains respectful, it gets to remain up. If there is another work you would like to see me discuss or read aloud in the manner that we are doing here, drop that in the box as well. And if you really like what I'm doing over here, hit me with that super thanks. Consider joining for a membership where you get access to my book for like $4, or pick up a copy of the book. Any of those will help, and it will be greatly appreciated. To the crew, thanks for hanging out. I appreciate every single minute that you are here with me, and I am praying for you every single day. Until next time, I love you. God loves you. You are perfect, whole, and complete just the way that you are. And this has been Pit's Take. Peace.